thrilled to have Carlos here. He's a great friend and a great photographer, and the work speaks for itself. But you know what speaks to, I think, us at the BDC about the work is that it's not quick hits. It's not people coming in, doing a quick thing and getting out. It's Carlos's life. It's Carlos's community, Carlos's family. So it's the type of work that we don't see. This is the real deal. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you, man.
Let me make sure this works from here. Perfect. So can we turn on the lights just so we can see the screen?
David, can you?
I'm gonna just talk about. I'm just gonna narrate the story on how I got started on this project, and I've been working on this project for 8 years. It's a long-term documentary that I didn't really know I was gonna get into, but it just happened. After the death of these 2 little girls in Chicago, I was living in Philadelphia at the time, and I started photographing. I worked for I'm not a newspaper photographer, but I had a job there. That's the career I thought I wanted to take. And I wasn't allowed to really work in Camden, a place next to the bridge to Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey. It was my community, Black and Puerto Rican community, mostly. And they didn't really care about me working there because they wanted the high school sports and all this other stuff that didn't matter to me because I thought I was going to take pictures of important issues. So I was always interested in documentary photography from the great Eugene Richards, the father of documentary photography. And of course, Dorothea Lange and many others. I can throw names out on here, but I want to get into the work. So last year, in the summer, actually the year before in the summer, I've been showing this work to my friend Jason Eskenazi, and we decided to. He wanted to publish this work with me through Red Hook Editions.
It's a small publishing.
It's a small publishing company
to empower like photographers and workers that we're doing. Yeah. So I talked to Jason and we went to Red Hook and we sat down with Peter Van Ockmill, Jason, Alan, Chen, and a bunch of other people came through the room, and it was a real overwhelming experience to like put this work on a board and tear it apart, not in a bad way, but just kind of think about the movement of the pictures, going back and forth. At the end of it, we spent 4 days, 12-hour days, in a room. There was a lot of cigarette smoking. We'll talk about that. We're drinking beer and talking about the work. But I had to go home with this work, like about 80, 90 pictures, and I had to figure this out. So I had to actually sit down and tell the story myself and put this book together. So when I went home, I was so overwhelmed and I was like really tired, and I was just like put it away for like 5 days, and then it clicked and I started putting it together. And it went through like 15 different iterations, and I finally got it out. So the book is here. We put it together with the help of a lot of people. You can't do this work by yourself. And I'm going to start talking about the work. So I grew up in Chicago. Again, had this feeling that I had to do this work from experience in Chicago, witnessing youth violence, going to school. In high school, I sat next to a kid who killed a security guard for a gang initiation in the 90s. And you know, that's really shocking, right? You're in school one day, and all of a sudden this skinny Puerto Rican kid with a fro, for some reason, ends up killing a security guard. And you know, at that age, you don't really understand why. You're kind of like, this happened. There was other kids that didn't make it back. after summer break, didn't make it back to school. So all these kind of influences kind of put this thing in my brain about youth violence. In the year 2000, I started thinking about photographing this because I worked on a long-term documentary project for a year, and I was like asked to go and photograph violence in Chicago for a year. And when I went to the street to check out what was going on, what I was seeing was kids getting killed mostly in neighborhoods on the west side of Chicago, in Englewood, in different neighborhoods of Chicago. So I talked to a friend, and my friend John Lowenstein, and we really talked about this. And of course, you know, the idea started in 2000, but it didn't fruition until 2006, when I got a phone call from my friend Josh. And my friend Josh called me up. He's a photographer as well. And I kind of was telling him my interest in going back to really, you know, I came back home to Chicago to really focus on my project and my work in the city I lived and loved. And I got a phone call from Josh, and I picked up the phone, and he's like, "Yo, a little girl was shot and killed in Englewood today." And I was like, "What?" He said to me, "A little girl was shot and killed in Englewood as she was getting ready to go to school." Her name was Sarkeisha Reed, and she was like, you know, like every day kids do, they get ready to go to school, they eat their breakfast, and she was hearing the pops of AK-47 taking place right here in front of her house, on her block on 69th and Honore. And the bullet went through the window. The guy that was beefing with the other guy, the bullets missed his target and ended up killing Sarkeisha. Sarkeisha Reed. And so Josh made that phone call, and we drove to the house. And I remember the house vividly. It's not this house, it's the house across the street. But the house is a white house with a for rent sign on top. And when we got there, there was the news media was there, the photographers were in front of the house, the press was there, and balloons were tied to railings on the house. Kids were showing up in support of the family. And it was kind of a gesture that people were used to, and that we might not be used to, but it was something like almost it just took place. It's something people were already used to it, but they were there in support. One of the hardest part to see when I was in front of the house, it was this window was broken, and it was a cold March day, and air was coming through, and people were hanging out, but the window wasn't boarded up. It was just sitting there open. Glass was on the ground. And these houses look similar because they're in the same neighborhood, built in the 40s. These were mostly Polish neighborhoods that became black neighborhoods over time. White flight took off, and people started moving in. So this is Sarita White, another girl that was killed 8 days apart from Sarkeisha. And that's really where the story took off for me. I knocked on the door, on this door here, and spoke to her family, and really told them what I wanted to do. The day before, they were celebrating Sarita's birthday at school, because 2 days before she was killed at her 10th birthday party. So I got a phone call that night from her mother. I gave them pictures from the day before. People always ask me, how do you get in? How do you get so close? And you know, I think we're close to people when we talk to them, and you can get closer when you give them something back. So I gave them pictures, and she called me that day, and she's like, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go to this radio station with me. And hours later, I was in her house photographing one of the hardest moments in her life. I still don't know why I was there, but I think what she wanted me to do was to tell the story about the suffering of her family. And throughout time, I would go back and forth with the family. Throughout time, I started meeting other people and thinking about other parts of this project. Years later, like 5 years later, well, actually 7 years later into the project, take that back, 6 years later into the project, I met Andali Petit, who was shot when he was 14 and left in a wheelchair. He wasn't supposed to ever walk again, talk, brush his teeth. Nowadays he's moving around in his wheelchair. So I follow a lot of things. Working at a newspaper kind of taught me how to listen to a scanner and follow the police radios. So a lot of the project too was actually being on the street when things would happen. These boys were shooting at a cop, ended up shooting at a cop car, and they got into a chase. And the youngest boy in the car, who probably wasn't shooting, he was just hanging out with his cousin or brother or somebody, was as young as 9 years old, like this little shorty. So, you know, it's not always that like the police are shooting at people or people are shooting at the police. It's a very complicated issue. This is an issue, you know, violence is the last part of it. A lot of it has to do with poverty, the war on drugs, the neglect that's happened, racism, the redlining of neighborhoods in Chicago during the Great Migration, where black folks were kept out of certain neighborhoods, and folks weren't able to invest in different parts of the city. And the South Side was really like actually starting to take off after before 2008, and then when the market crashed, everything stopped, everything slowed down, and we started to see actually more board ups. In the picture of the girls, I started seeing board ups in Inglewood. There was some board ups, but houses were coming back, and you started seeing board ups, and I was kind of like, what, you know, what's going on? What, you know, I'm seeing board ups. People are starting to abandon the neighborhood, and then the market crash. And again, I just started following the story in different ways. This boy was shot. Aaron Harris was shot in the back by police, and this was like a small Ferguson that took place on the west side. For a week, there was like this battle going on between the police and protesters, people in the neighborhood. The night before this, there was like a mini riot on the street, and when I got there, I didn't really know about it, but when I got there, you know, the police were out. They started pushing people back, and then somebody threw a brick and hit the cop car window, and then all hell broke loose. You know, and it was just this tension, like, who started it first? Did the police start? Because they shot this boy in the back, and they were telling people to get the fuck out of here. You know, people in the neighborhood are getting pushed back and forth. So there's a lot of tension. Everybody was like, he didn't have a gun. So this week, this thing started. There was a protest in front of the police station. And it just kind of, it could have been a bigger thing like Ferguson, but you never know. I mean, these explosions are always there. Then back to the story in Philly, when I started the project, you know, I started noticing that places that were abandoned again by the simple things of people having to, police and fire department coming up and washing blood off the sidewalk, and family members are left to do this. So this is the aunt of Jaleel Speaks, who got shot, got into an argument over a rap contest in school. It's always more complicated than that, though. And then the next day, she's sitting there washing blood. And I kept going back and forth on several trips. After a while, I stopped going back to Philly because the story was really at home where I lived. But hours after getting off the plane, I'm sitting in front of Germantown convenience store. In Philadelphia, to me, is very similar to Chicago. So I went out there to work. Sorry, let's go back. Sorry, I apologize. So I went out there to work and see what was going on the streets. And then, back to Chicago in the neighborhood where young men, are hanging out, kind of lounging. And this is on the block where Sarita lived. And, these guys end up getting, and knew most of all the brothers on the block. They end up getting a little marijuana possession conviction on their records, and then they can't get jobs, So what do you do when you can't even go downtown to get a job because there's no job in your neighborhood? You end up hanging out on the block with your friends. The book actually started, the name of the book actually came out of this photograph here. We All We Got was written on the wall. So that was a part of the project, was kind of like bringing out the title of the book, where the book was going to go to, back to Chicago in the neighborhood. There's this great myth, like when Ferguson was taking place. I'm using Ferguson as the reference. I mean, this stuff has been going on in Chicago for years, but Mayor Giuliani was on TV talking to Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, and they were going back and forth about the police, and Giuliani said, well, the cops wouldn't be out there if you guys wouldn't be shooting each other, because nobody's protesting over it, and Dr. Michael Eric Dyson's like, what are you talking about? We protest this stuff all the time. We talk about this all the time. And that's one thing I wanted to show in my book, the resilience, the presence of people in the neighborhood, because there's this myth that, people don't care, but people do care, People come out and talk about this all the time. So going back, the sequence of the work, it's non-sequential because, to me, life is not sequential. And I just wanted to go back, weave back in and out through these stories. I was at Sarita's house hours after the radio station. We were hanging out in the house. Her family came in from the south to support her, to visit her. Sarita's husband ended up being in the hospital. The mother and the daughter have the same name, Sarita. It's actually a Spanish name, but they changed it up, so Sarita. And this is Nono, her brother, sitting on the couch. So this is how I started meeting my other family. This is like the first day I was in their house, and by like the second day I kept going back and forth all the way up to her funeral, and then hanging out and just following through on what was happening. And then hours later I was being called, their light-skinned cousin. So they couldn't find a nickname for me, so it's like, that's Lois, or light-skinned cousin.
It's better than high yellow.
It is way better than high yellow. And, there was never a time when she said to me, don't take a picture. She actually wanted these photographs for her family to have. Wilbur, her husband, was in the hospital. The day she got shot, he ended up going to the hospital because he had a bad heart to start with. And the day we buried Sarita, this hour, about 3 hours later, her mother, Sarita, didn't even actually get a chance to really put her daughter to rest, right? Because Wilbur was sick. On the way to this cemetery, we're in the car, and his blood pressure dropped and hours later he passed away. So you know, that day was really, I mean, these days were really hard because, you know, you start getting close, you start becoming part of family. And here's me a week into it and I'm already heartbroken. I just couldn't imagine what the rest of the family felt like. But, you know, that was okay to Sarita because Nugget, Sarita's nickname is Nugget, the baby. Nugget, well, you know, she went to heaven with her father, is the way the family felt. So, you know, again, going back to the block, this is about 3-4 weeks after we buried Sarita, and, you know, the lots that once had houses are now taken over by nature, and glass, and all these other things, but the boys and girls have a place to play, you know, because the playgrounds are dangerous. So we, you know, I kept in touch. A lot of things were happening on the block. We lost a family member. Sarita's brother was murdered. He was a good friend. He's real cool. He was just a dude that chilled and would go to parties, and he was murdered. And then OC got murdered. OC was a neighbor who was a great man. He would actually stick up and break up fights in the neighborhood. And he was a school teacher. He was hustling on the side, selling shoes to support his family. And somebody robbed him at gunpoint and shot him. Didn't take anything from him, but when OC was murdered, that just kind of like, for me, I just, you know, I saw OC in a tuxedo in his casket, and I was like, it really broke my heart because OC was the right guy. You know, he was the guy we needed in the neighborhood. He would bring out his equipment and play music on the block parties, and had the one-on-one basketball, because there's a lot of block parties in Chicago. There's a tradition. So after a while, the structure actually broke down in the neighborhood in Englewood. And Sarita was the matriarch. She was that structure. She would feed people, she would feed me, anyone that would come by. And, you know, after a while, they just had to get out and move to a different neighborhood where there wasn't structure, where she didn't have family. And the Christmas tree went up. And then years later, like 8 years later, we kept losing phone numbers, and I didn't see Sarita for 5 years. I didn't see the family for 5 years. And we met up at Nugget's, what would have been Nugget's 18th birthday. And I was like, you know, at this point, I was like, this is when I gotta put the work out. I started seeing, you know, family members I didn't see for a while, like No, the kid on the couch, that's him. He's now big. And, you know, and it makes me wonder what Sarita would have looked like, you know? What would she look like in her 18th birthday? And again, going back to the story of Annalie, Annalie is this cool kid who ended up really overcoming a lot of things. At one point he had a Superman wheelchair, and he went from the Superman wheelchair where he had a puff right to go right and take a puff back to go left, you know, and he called it the Superman wheelchair. And his wheelchair, his motorized wheelchair, his mom started doing therapy with him, and that wheelchair, the motorized one, broke, and then he's left his manual wheelchair. He can't move his right arm, but at one point he wanted to play video games, and his little nephew said, "Uncle Lee, just play with your left hand, man, in your mouth. You got this." And Uncle Lee started playing with his left hand in his mouth, and now he kills anybody on that PlayStation, you know? So to me, that's just the beauty within the tragedy, the resilience. You know, Andali can't go to school, he wants to go to school. And then there's abandoned schools in a way where boys and girls are left with really excellent teachers, but some teachers don't show up because of certain situations, or they don't have a classroom to fill, and kids are lounging. And when I talk to kids about this picture, it's been published in many places, and you always get your blame Obama crazies, and there's like, oh, look at these thugs, you know, and they say all this stuff, and then I show it to certain crowds of kids, and they talk about it, and this kid's like, you know, I showed it to this kid yesterday, and they're like, oh, he's just saying, teach me, man, teach me, you know, talk to me. And that's what he was saying. He's like, come look at this, come look at me. I'm great, you know, I'm worth something, I'm valuable. So I went to the school, Paul Roberson High School in Chicago, and I spent some time going back and forth. This is a lot of my work. I would work on it on my own, and then people would see it, and I worked with NPR on some pieces, Chicago Public Radio on some pieces. And then I did this other part with Chicago Public Radio that gave me access to the prisons. So we spent a lot of time working on this work called In and Out. It's about youth incarceration and the prison to pipeline. And these are all things I was thinking about doing, and they just kind of came through for me. How kids, you know, spend their time in jail. I couldn't identify any of the kids, so I always had like a hawk behind me, watching me, making sure that I didn't take pictures of their faces. This lawyer who hated me. And then she really hated me when she saw this picture published, because, you know, you can't see any faces, but you know, it just kind of shows you. This is kind of the holding cell. If you get into a fight, you end up in this lockup, and if you get sick to be transferred, you end up in this lockup. So, you know, it kind of talks about our penal system, how fair and how righteous it is. A lot of the kids are going in, and they get auto mechanic classes, and they teach them how to fix lawnmowers, and they're learning this stuff over and over, and it's like nothing, because they're just lounging. They're not really learning the skills they need to get out of prison, make themselves better. There's no real rehabilitation there. This photograph was a mural inside the prison, and to me it really speaks about resilience within the place. You know, Chicago is real flat. There's no mountains in Chicago, but you know, it talks about the dream. Is the dream getting out, hooping, or just playing in the park? How, you know, where is the dream in the photograph? The dream is downtown, but there's mountains and mountains in front of you to get there. So after the death of Darian Albert, this boy that was, he was killed during a fight in Chicago. And it was just a fight, you know, like kids get into fights, and somebody picked up a log from one side and hit this other kid in the face, and then these other kids picked up a log and hit Darian Albert. And this was caught on an iPhone. Somebody was filming it, and it became a huge story, like what's going on with youth violence in Chicago. And Barack Obama sent Arnie Duncan, who was actually in front of the house when Starkeisha was killed. And what's his name? Eric Holder, Mayor Daley, who's been Chicago's mayor for many years before Rahm Emanuel. And you know, and to me, like, it's for these stories to get one of the reasons why I kept going back and forth, was because, you know, it's the perfect narrative to pay attention to this issue when a perfect kid gets killed or murdered, right? If they had straight A's and they were honor roll students, then it's like, oh, that's a tragedy. But when boys are maybe not too good, have a record, get shot or killed, then those stories don't really take place, you know? They don't really, people don't really pay attention to those stories in the press or politicians. Father Mike works with these brothers with Brian in the corner and other brothers on the block. It's a different way of getting kids off the street. So they gather these guys. It's a real tight circle. Father Mike has been at this church at St. Sabina for almost 30 years. And there was this month of a lot of violence in Chicago, and in Alvin Gresham, there was nothing. There were shootings, but there was no murders. So these guys are going out talking, preventing stuff. But Father Mike starts, he'll get into it with the big gang leaders in the neighborhood. He'll call them out. And then Andali was telling me, I want to go to prom, man. I want to drive my car. So Father Mike actually gave Andali like $300 to get his car and his tuxedo and pick up his date. So I just followed Andali to prom that day, and helped him get dressed. And there was a lot more pictures, but of course you got to edit down the work and take it to a different place. But Andali picked up his date and he was hanging, and it was cool, like the kids in his school didn't treat him like he was in a wheelchair. He'd get up and take his prom picture with his date. And now he's sponsored by a wheelchair company. He's going to college. How do families celebrate the youth on the block? Again, another block party to honor the babies in their block. So this block party is pretty amazing in Alvin Gresham on the south side. And this picture here ends the book, but this to me is We All We Got. It's a picture I kind of ignored for a long time because I didn't know what to do with it. And then when I was editing and when I was talking to people influence you to bring pictures back in, and that was like the big influence for me, was bringing this picture back into the project, because this really says to me, we all we got. So that's the last picture in the project. Questions?
Can I just open up the questions?
Yeah, of course.
I can't believe nobody else was raising their hand. I was kind of like, please, somebody. So I've lived here in New York City for 20 years, and I'm originally from 24, and I'm originally from Boston. And I have family that lived in Roxbury, and so when I compare my mom's side to where my dad's side is from, Bobby Brown comes from my dad's housing project. So that'll give you an example. And when I kind of moved here to Harlem, I saw what was supposed to be something that was on the upswing. Mm-hmm. And even though I would invite people up to Harlem, they would. Mm-hmm. It was like selling a car with three wheels. Mm-hmm. It was just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. It's very, very, very interesting to kind of see what's going on now in Harlem and the Bronx. Mm-hmm. This transformation, and even though one should be optimistic, it's a double-sided coin there. Mm-hmm. So we see hope in the Bronx and we see hope in Harlem, and we know it's going to benefit some but not all. Do you feel that after having done this series of documentary and photos and everything, that there is any hope in Chicago whatsoever? Because I personally watch something like this and I feel no. Mm-hmm. And as a black male, I should not feel that way, but when I see it, I say to myself, have these people give it up. So do you, because you were there, I was not there.
Right, right. I mean, in the film, you really see that like people haven't given up. You know, and that's the part I like to poke at in my project is there's resilience in this beautiful struggle. You know, this hard struggle. You know, actually, I think Chicago's starting to take a turn. It's difficult to say because, of course, gentrification takes place. People end up migrating from their neighborhoods and leaving. So, you know, it's difficult to quantify that, like, this change that's taking place, but people are paying attention, you know. I think in Chicago, people are paying a lot of attention and are starting to, like, raise hell, which really, you know, people were screaming for this. And, you know, I met Spike Lee a couple of weeks ago in Chicago. He was talking to me about this stuff. So, you know, there's people coming out and looking. And not just Chicago, other cities in the U.S., you know. We're talking about it nationwide now, these issues that I don't think were addressed during, you know, the Bush administration. So I don't know if it's, I'm maybe going off in too many ways, but I don't know if it's the...
I guess I'm asking, is Chicago becoming a Harlem or is it becoming a Detroit? Because it's like you want them all to kill each other so that you can come in and just do what you want to do.
Right.
And so I feel that it looks like it's going more toward a Detroit as opposed to a Harlem.
No, it's. I mean, Chicago is changing. Chicago changes real quick, you know. So Chicago is changing quickly. The West and South Side are not changing as fast, but they're starting to tear up buildings like you would see in Harlem. So it is changing, you know. But that's why I documented this decade that was there, you know. Now, what's going to happen in the next decade? I mean, they knocked down high-rises, meaning we had the largest projects in the U.S. at one point. They're all gone, you know. Yeah, Cabrini Green, Stateway Gardens, the Leaky Homes, Henry Horner, where this great book was written, There Are No Children Here. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's high-priced land. There's a lot of abandoned buildings, you know. People in the neighborhood talk about it. They see what's happening. We had the highest school closings in history in the U.S. And that was a difficult thing to see, you know. But now you know, so I'm not really involved in the politics of it. You know, I'm more involved in documenting and speaking out in that way. Mayor Emanuel, as much as I dislike him, started doing pre-K, kindergarten for all kids in Chicago before that wasn't happening. But he was able to do that because he closed a bunch of schools. So, you know, where's the balance of it, you know? So, I know that's long-winded, but it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like there is one.
No, there isn't one. There isn't one. I mean, you know, you're looking at the outcome of the war on drugs. You know, the failed war on drugs, the failed war on poverty and education. And you know, Michelle Alexander says it the best. You look at Bill Clinton as one of the greats. The Democrats look at Bill Clinton as one of the greats, but Bill Clinton had a lot of policies that actually helped incarcerate black and brown men and poor white men and women, you know. So we got to point that stuff out and you know, poke at it and address it. Yes.
Please.
No problem.
I get nervous so much, guys.
I do too.
But off that, do you find that by addressing these issues, it kind of polarizes the black community a little bit? It kind of separates them a little bit from the rest of the mainstream society? Like what I noticed with Eric Garner and the other kid, Michael Brown, it's I noticed a trend. You have a lot of like the millennials, the white millennials protesting, you know, everybody together, but everybody's not together. So I noticed by showing these images, instead of more uplifting images, positive images, you're kind of showing a negative side of black culture, in a way.
Did I am?
Not you are.
Oh.
Addressing these issues
Uh-huh.
without any correct, you know, I don't know what people are trying to do by addressing these issues. You're addressing the issue, but what are people trying to do?
The solution?
What's the solution? Yeah. You always
So-
need a solution, I think.
I want to make sure I'm not
I'm
lost.
sorry, I get nervous again.
Yeah, no problem. No. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I don't want to put words in your mouth either.
No.
But I think what I see, I'm just gonna talk about what I see. You know, I was in Ferguson, and like I said, I was in the West Side when Aaron Harris was shot, you know, in the back. And you know, for me, like the police always find a gun, right? In Chicago, they never not find a gun. You know, out of all the shootings.
But I mean, in these communities, there's a lot of people doing, there's a lot of normal people doing a lot of good things, a lot of positive things. You know, I've been in a lot of high-risk neighborhoods
Mhm.
in Chicago and New York, and just normal people doing, you know, care, whatever, adoption places, whatever, people taking care of kids, even the, you know, the mother on the block watching out for everybody, adopting kids. So I don't know why these people aren't shown enough, because they're, you know, they're very intellectual people. I'm just speaking up for them. That's all. I'm not trying to make a fight.
But why are they not showed in where? I mean,
In the discourse, it's
in my discourse or in the discourse in general?
Discourse in general.
Oh yeah, well that's I mean that's a great question. I mean, okay, now I got it. That's a
Yeah,
great question, and you know, this is my discourse of,
Yeah.
of going out and showing the access I have, and you know, I think we got to put pressure on the press, on
The tragedy sells.
on ourselves, yeah, to really push the narrative into a different light, you know. I think that's what's happening at the BDC, and that's the way we gotta make it come out. I mean, Ferguson is an example of a complicated one, but you know, when I was in Ferguson, what I saw myself when I got on the ground the day, like 3 days after it went down, you know, I saw young brothers on the street, like after the police left the neighborhood, like because there was armed, you know, cops, and you see this in Chicago, right? You've seen this in America after 9/11 as an excuse to combat terrorism, you know. We lose more people to gun violence than terrorists in our country. We lose way more people to gun violence. And, you know, what I saw in Ferguson was a bunch of young brothers that were proud and were actually expressing freedom were actually expressing themselves as freedom of expression on the street. And there was no violence. There was no clashing with the cops. That was happening. Nobody was looting anything. This is like days before this looting took place and stuff. A day before the looting took place. So, you know, and people on the block were like directing traffic. So it's this narrative that you know, but what was the narrative that came out of that? You know, a little bit of looting. There's people defending stores there too. And the looting wasn't a lot actually. It was, you know, the cops weren't present when there was looting. So I'm just saying all these examples to bring out the point that the narrative that you know, that's actually, I think actually starting to come out because there's more people with cameras, is actually starting to change, you know. Yes.
So at the beginning of your project, like, how did you think of like gun violence differently, like towards the end, like did anything change?
That's a really good question. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, at the beginning of the project, I thought about gun violence. I didn't know what to really think, you know, because I saw, like I said, people in high school, friends of mine that were colleagues of mine that were killed. I'm still, you know, this is probably something I'm still going to be learning until as long as I live, you know. So when I first went into it, I didn't go in with a notion that I knew what I was going to expect. I went in with an open heart, open mind, and that was the hardest thing to keep because it's hard to maneuver through it, and what I've learned is that, you know, there are policies that are made for these things to take place, you know,
Right.
and we got to break those policies.
Sorry, he's right, guys. He's absolutely right on that one.
I got something I would like to say.
By design.
Hello, how y'all doing? My name is Antonio Hendrickson, and I'm with the Guns Down Life Up, funds for HAC. My organization is Lead by Example and Reverse a Trend. It's a mentor self-improvement program. I'm also an intern at the Department of Probation right here at the South Bronx Neon. I'm also the lead mentor for the BCCJR Archers program. I work with this demographics all day, every day. I'm also a returning citizen because I did time in prison, and I'm a credible messenger. So I really could speak on behalf of them and what we think the solution is to the problem. What I have learned through my working with them, because through being incarcerated and working with these gang members and talking with them, especially the young ones, we ask them, what is the problem? What's wrong? Because you don't know what the problem is unless they tell you, right? And when what they told us is that the older people don't care nothing about us, and we don't know how to care. So we asked them, well, what can we do? What do you want from us? How can we help you? They said, well, we want somebody that we can trust, that's trustworthy, and that can teach us what we do not know. So they want credible messengers. And so the solution to the problem is love them. Show them that you care about them. The other solution to the problem is education. Because they need the knowledge of themselves. The only reason they kill each other is because they don't see themselves in each other.
Actually, I have a question. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for bringing this important body of work. Growing up in the South Bronx, right here in the bloodiest district in the city during the 80s and 90s, you know, seeing this is really important. And to actually answer a couple of your questions when you mentioned that, you know, why are we focusing on the negative? I think we do need to see the negative. We need to see what's going on in our country with all the people that are dying. You know, if we don't see it, you know, the media doesn't really show us.
But I mean, if you show the negative, what's the problem? When you show the negative, it's polarizing.
But that's why this gentleman came out. You know, this gentleman, and then you know, this is what happens. You know, seeing this negative sparks that in you. You know, that passion in you to do something, to say enough is enough. That's I just wanted to address that part. That's the way I see it. Second, I just want to ask you a question about that last gentleman in the clip, the one that was voguing down the street. That was really a very beautiful moment. I'm just curious why you decided to add that clip.
Oh, because I mean, you know, I can go in so many different things, but the boys that were twirling the rifle team, they're out, you know, in the community, and then they're on the street. So there's they're walking on the street. There's a group of folks out there, young folks, and everybody's celebrating everybody else. And when this dude started voguing, you know, it was so open, and the girls were like, I cut the sound out because it just didn't go in with the rest of it. They're like, "Come on, best friend," you know, and he was showing off his dancing. I think in the black and brown communities, the Latino and black community, we have this stigma against young gay folks that are our brothers and sisters too, and I just wanted to add that part of life, you know, because that's part of that's, you know, it can be looked at negative or positive. I showed this, when I showed this, it's risky for me to show the work, but when I showed it in Chicago, this brother got up and he's like, man, thanks for addressing the gay community. That's very important for us, and it's very important that it's in your work. There's all kinds of people in all different places, so I don't know. I thought it was a beautiful part of life and the neighborhood. So I was like, it's in, and his dancing is beautiful, I mean, but you got to watch the whole film. If you catch it in half, you might be like, oh, why this looks bad or whatever. So yeah, his movement, his shaking, his showing to this dudes with the rifles that they were dancing too on the block, and it's just part of life, Thanks for asking that question, though. This brother right here.
So this is like foreign to me. I grew up in a very like white, and nothing happened. It's very boring. So like, the question is like, is it become normal to like have your friend just die? Like how does it like? To me, I didn't know anybody that died until my grandfather died. It's like, so when you see these kids, it's like, is that just normal? Like, it's just like, oh, he's dead. So that's, it's just like, it blows my mind to see like these kids dying, and it's just like.
Well, that's the thing I like. I learned about addressing this issue. I mean, I met kids who lost 5 friends between the time. And let me tell you a story. When I started working on this project on the block, I would see kids, little kids, rolling around the neighborhood, hanging out, playing. Kids that were in the house when Sarita was shot, who never got. This is something that doesn't. These kids that were, talking about getting shot. They never have any follow through from seeing social workers. Nobody. The cops are asking them what happened. But the cops are not saying, well, I need a social worker down here.
Right.
There was blood on the concrete, and I photographed it because that's important to show that that's there, right? But the reason why the fire department came out there, and I filmed that too, was that me as a person, as a citizen, as a person that cares or whatever, I called the fire department and I was like, yo.
You called?
Yeah, I called the fire department. I was like, yo, you guys got to get out here and clean this blood up. And then they came because the family was going to come to the park later that day. So back to like going to Englewood in Chicago, I saw these little innocent kids grow up. The guy who ended up shooting Sarita was Sarita's godson, and he didn't intend to kill her. There was some dudes on the block that were in a gang, and he was shooting at them, and the bullet went through the window. Now he played with Sarita when she was a baby. So it's complicated. It's not like this thing that it's complicated. And then Moses, the guy who shot Sarita, he was shot in the leg when he was 8. So
is it just like you become it's just this is what life is, or is it like this is horrible and can someone help us, or is this accepted like this is just the way it is?
Well, I mean, I think we've accepted it as a country. We haven't addressed it as a country, and we need to do that. And I guess that's the reason why we're here is we're talking about it.
It's important to see that this is real. I mean, this isn't a film. This is a real thing. That real people, real tragedy. And it's like horrible.
Just to kind of piggyback off of that one, I know like a lot of kids become desensitized to the murders, like the guy said. They see it all the time, where it just becomes nothing to them. Do you ever see growing up, or like being out there, or did you ever come across, or photograph anybody where, as opposed to becoming desensitized, they were actually like kind of just psychologically damaged? had like the complete opposite effect, where it's like they're seeing constant death all the time. You know, they just kind of they can't take it anymore.
Yeah, there's a if you guys have a chance to download a podcast on This American Life called Harper High School.
Yeah, that was.
Well, in that podcast, the guy who wrote the foreword in my book, his name's Alex Kotlowitz. He's a great American writer and a friend of mine. And he was interviewing this boy named Thomas at the school. I was going to go work at that school as well, but it was just, it gets to be a lot, you know, but I was doing other things. But anyways, Alex was following this boy named Thomas who was at Sarita's birthday party. And, you know, Thomas never got to see a psychologist, you know. When you see these mass school shootings, you get counselors and psychologists. You know, kids in the hood don't get counselors and psychologists for the most part. So there's a lot of mental anguish happening when you witness such violence, right? So I was introducing Alex to Sarita's mother, and he was talking about Thomas, and he showed me a picture, and I'm like, oh, I know that kid. He has a twin. And Alex is like, no, he doesn't have a twin. And we got in the house, and we showed Sarita the picture, and she goes, no, that was Thomas. He was at the party. And I'm like, doesn't he have a twin? And we're like, oh, yeah, the twins. And I'm like, what's up with the twins? How are they? And I would see these kids, you know, running through the block as little kids. And like when they hit to be like 10, 12, 13, they would get influenced by other people on the block. And the young guys, even in that Harper story, you'll hear that like the older guys come after the young kids on the block. And then they got to start protecting themselves because the police not doing it. You know, there's nobody getting in the middle of the way of that. And again, that goes into a whole deeper conversation, but I asked him about the twins, and you know, this devastated me, really, it affected me to this day. One of the twins got shot, I think 6 times, hit Thomas's brother, and he lost his leg. And I saw these babies growing up, you know. So yeah, that's. Can I get her first, and then we'll come.
Oh, one, I just wanted to say that I really love the photograph with the little girls, you know, on the street and there. I just thought it was incredibly beautiful and tragic, and anyway, I thought it was an amazing photograph. 2, I was wondering, I don't know, it feels sort of like a memorial, the series of photographs you hear about so much. This, and I was wondering if that was something that you were thinking about when you started the project, or did it happen in the editing, or was that even something that you were thinking about? My last question is well, I think I mentioned I'm from Chicago, and I left there in '92, and I remember hearing the story about Harper, and I'm like, I know that neighborhood, sort of, and
yeah,
that was terrifying to me, and that's not what I remember, and I'm wondering how much you think, like, getting rid of all of the projects, I mean, that was hundreds of thousands of people, how much that disturbed, like, the entire South Side and the West Side. Like you talked about, well, there used to be structure, and now there's no structure. And when I go back home, like, I feel like it's completely disintegrated. Like the neighborhoods don't feel like neighborhoods anymore, and people don't necessarily know each other. And there's been sort of a black flight to the suburbs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's something I think we talked about when I first met you, but you know, you can't put like the solutions to these things. I mean, you see it after it happens, after it gets documented. You're like, oh wait, that was you know, at first building these high rises was good. If you guys can get a chance to, Javier Ortiz addresses Stateway Gardens in his book, The Great American Project. American Project. You know, and so getting back to this, it's like they tore down the projects and thought that by tearing down the projects, it would go away. I mean, this happened in New York. I don't know what year when Robert Moses, tore down the projects in the Bronx to make the Bronx.
Built the Cross Bronx Expressway.
Yeah, Cross Bronx.
Tore down the projects?
I mean,
We did it, 60,000 tenement, 60,000 tenement.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
But there was.
Boston and Chicago have torn them down, but New York is the only city.
But
that-
there was a group of housing that was in the way, right?
Right.
Of the highway, right?
You tore down tenements. Yeah.
Tenements. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, big
Tenements.
difference.
Tenements. Sorry.
Right.
And then and then it broke down a big family structure. So that happened in Chicago too. Like you live in Cabrini Green, you got grandmother, grandfather, family next door that takes care of your kid when you're out working. So that was a big problem when they tore down the projects. People moved to different neighborhoods. Folks from the north side that are not used to the south side or never lived in the south side. Different gangs clashed with each other. There was a big arrest of gangs in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they took all the gang leaders off the street, and then it broke the gang structure, and there was a lot of what do you call it? Fractions? Crews. Yeah, little crews that started up and cliques, and that just blew up. So that blocks were owned by different gangs in Chicago, and now it's all little crews fighting each other. So it's not just one thing. It's like all these things that are compiled again on top of each other. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. I mean, there's so much to say. First of all, it was really great, the display of pictures and what you told. And I really did see it as something positive, because you're talking about the life of people. I didn't see you showing people shooting at one another or people stabbing one another, but you told of the life of people, of the life of disenfranchised people, the life of people who are hopeful and at the same time, or maybe they're hopeless, but at the same time they're hopeful. Do they seek to, are they not affected by loved ones being killed? Of course they are. You know, we're not Vietnam. My dad was in Vietnam. Was he not affected by seeing as a he was probably 21, 22 at that time, seeing so many people killed? Of course they are. So they come back. Not any time. At no time do I believe the African American community thinks this is acceptable. You know, but there's another world going on. So someone gets killed. And so they put flowers in front of the building or in that spot where the person got killed, because that's their way of remembering. That's their way of showing respect. It's no less or no better of a way than any other culture, but that is the way that people chooses to honor and to remember that person that was in that neighborhood, the person who sits on the block, or the guys, right? Because in my grandparents grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in Harlem in the projects. My father was a police officer. My mom worked for the city. And so we would play cards in my grandmother's kitchen, the house that my uncle owned, you know, her son-in-law, because we had a house to play in. So some others, and I may not agree with it, so they might play on the block. They might shoot dice on the block, because that's their culture, that's their subculture of the culture. And if we look within our cultures, it is happening, whether it's in white America, Latino, Black. And what's so crazy, you know, I've always said, and I could go on and on, we look at what Black America does, and it's Black America.
Yeah.
We look at what white society does, and it's society. you know, really, Black America is still our society. It's what's going on at large, you know, and not taking away anything from what he said. But, you know, some parts of white America, you don't see all the shaking and some of the devastation, but it all still goes on.
Well, you look, I mean, there's, I think it was DOS effects. You're gonna correct me on this, no, I'm just kidding.
No,
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm a Harlem nerd.
I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing, I'm just trying to make, you know, make a little, DOS effects on this KRS record, KRS-One record said, in a line, they'd say, America was violent before rap started, you know?
That's true.
And you know, you look at, you know, and that those are things I think about as when you look at this stuff. I mean, you look at Italian and Irish gangs,
Mafia.
you know, the mafia culture. How, you know, there was so this country is a gangster country, you know. So we end up marginalizing certain sectors and certain groups. Who's going to be next? You know, I was in. You go to different demographics, different places. I was in you know, and I can only address what I see in front of me. But it feels good to have people tell me, like, you got to address the Asian brothers getting killed in L.A. and, you know, and I didn't know this existed in L.A. You know, so I had this kid come up to me and talk to me about, like, what happened to him. You know, and the Latino brothers, I addressed that too in Chicago. If you look at the list in the book, there's, I wanted to address the age group 25 and under because that's what the CDC considers young people. So if you look at the numbers on a given year, like let's say 2012, half of the people killed in Chicago were 25 and under. Almost half of the list from 0 to 100, you know. So, yeah.
You talked about the reaction to the students' picture of people being a little shocked and saying that you're hoodlums and gangsters and whatnot. I'm curious, who do you show the pictures to, and what have you learned from showing the pictures?
Yeah, so I saw, I mean, I don't take that too much in those comments. I don't get those comments when I show to folks who are interested. I get those stupid, I mean, I mentioned that comment because it was published on MSNBC, and it was probably crazy, you know, that that just blurbed out some stuff, you know, and the crazies are always out there. So the reactions I get from students when I show the work is real positive, especially in the neighborhoods in Chicago. Like, I've shown this work in a lot of neighborhoods. They're like quiet because they're just reflecting. They haven't had a chance to be able to think or reflect or any of that take place in their lives because they're always either witnessing or being harassed. So yeah, that and I don't know if I'm answering your question, Stephen, but I've gotten some, you know, complicated and positive reactions to the work. Does that? I want to answer that.
Yeah, I'm just fascinated how people respond, particularly on issues like this where there's so much ignorance. I'm just curious because you're now putting this work out there, and I'm just curious what you're hearing back and whether you're learning stuff that you didn't know before about society, about people, about our knowledge. And you've got a particular perspective because you're putting it out and now you're giving a reflection back.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've shown the work to a lot of the families. Actually, I always say this, but the real reaction to me that I care about, and I hope I'm not sounding arrogant or selfish or anything like that, is the families I photograph, and I've invited them to the exhibitions, and You know that big picture back there with the house? When Sarita saw that, she's like, baby, you got it. That's my house. That's my place, you know? And they were there, you know, like they were there in Chicago during the exhibition in Chicago. And I got a bunch of big ups from them, you know, a lot of love, and they were just like, they were happy that I was there. Most of the, I think I said this earlier, but most of the times when I was with the people in Englewood, with Sarita's family, with the White family, I was called their photographer. So after a while, she'd introduce me to people, and she's like, "This is my photographer." So it took a lot of the, you know, like the arrogancy that photographers sometimes might get. You're like, "I'm the photographer." No, I was their photographer, you know, and I was selected by them. They selected me, you know. People always say, "How do you select your subjects?" Which I kind of don't like that word too much. But, you know, I say people select you. You know, people are going to let you into their lives by the way you are to them. So nobody's going to let you document anything. They select you. They pick you. So that's, I guess that's the answer, I guess, and the reaction I've gotten from people. Thanks for...
First, I'd like to say thank you for your work that you've done. My name is Sarah Delaney. I'm the outreach coordinator for Lead by Example, which is a violence prevention program here in the Bronx. We're also part of the Guns Down Life Up Compact, and one thing I'll say is there is a war that's going on in the inner cities every day. People are directly and indirectly affected by the loss of life of their loved ones. I've been to so many funerals that I stopped counting under the age of 25. You understand? There's so many people that I know that get shot up in hallways, on the street corners, and not everybody is out there doing something wrong. Many times it's innocent bystanders. Many times it's someone that's responding to someone in their family or their friends who have been hurt. That's retaliatory violence. But the scenario keeps going on. It keeps perpetuating itself. And three things that are very important are education, finance.
So I have a two-part question. First, I wanted to thank you for showing the resiliency with black and brown bodies in the U.S. when it comes to gun violence. I agree with what the comment you said, just about how it was positive, what you showed. And my first part question is I'm curious, when the families chose you, was part of them choosing you that they wanted you to tell their story of resiliency, or was that more your thinking when you?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the scary part is that, you know, people don't know your intentions, you know. So I try to, you know, like, I try to always make sure to represent people the right way, because I'm going to see them again and again. And I think sometimes what this brother right here was talking about, sometimes we, in the media or whatever the format is, in the movies, you know, the representation, I forgot this actor who's mixed with light eyes, shaved hair. I forgot his, I'm terrible with actors, but he was talking about him being in the, you know, an actor, and his boys that are actors would only get, and these are guys that are educated, went to school, have masters, are getting jobs being thugs and gangsters in movies, you know?
Jesse Williams.
Huh?
Jesse
Williams, yeah. So, so you know, it's the same thing with when people pick you to tell their stories, you know. I mean, the trust and the stuff that goes behind it, for me, was important to make sure to be honest about what's there, to show people what's there, but also make sure to be right, you know, and represent Sarita and Andali in a right way, you know. Even though, you know, I got pictures of Andali, I don't know, like pulling up his pants, getting dressed, you know. I have to dress him sometimes. I have to take him to the bathroom sometimes. and let him do his thing, you know. So, you know, once you get that deep, you start realizing that this is not just I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, this is important. It's not, you're not running in and out of a story. So that's why it takes me a long time to do my work, and I can't push it or be led in different ways. So.
And then I'm curious about, did you have additional intention in terms of the impact you wanted these stories and just this issue to have? You know, is it just these dialogues?
Yeah. I mean, I had this vision, but I didn't know it was going to go this far. I mean, I knew that I wanted to make a book. I knew that I wanted to put the work out into the public. A lot of it was pushing people to pay attention, to listen. But I didn't know I was, 8 years ago, shit, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be alive in 8 years. And 8 years ago, I didn't think that I'd be in the, 9 years ago in the Bronx hanging out, talking about this in a gallery space and bringing it out to people. So, yeah.
Let me just take like one more question.
Yeah, sure.
He's good. Carlo's going to stick around for a few minutes. We could take maybe one more question. He's going to sign some books if you want to buy a book, and he'll be here. You can talk to him, and he's not running out. But I do want to kind of slow it down because there's people that have to leave. I know.
Okay, cool. Last question.
If there's no questions, can I say something? Okay, finish.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Please,
I want to introduce.
You want to come up?
Yeah. I want to introduce myself. Miss Delaney already did. I'm the injury prevention coordinator over at Lincoln, which is just a couple blocks up the street, and we are working with the fund of HHC and Guns Down Life Up to try to help get into the community and keep these kids busy. We're going to be starting mentoring programs, after-school arts programs. So anybody that would like to volunteer and help, I have a bunch of business cards. So we're looking for volunteers for mentoring, along with lead by example. So I will also be around handing out business cards.
You guys should bring your students here and take a field trip.
We would love to.
And you guys also should.
This is a great event. Thank you very much for
the Bronx Documentary Center. Let me just say one last thing about this place. It's an amazing place in the Bronx. There's all kinds of mentors here. We're doing a photography workshop with the photographers from the Bronx here tomorrow. There's an artist in residency, and Mike, Bianca, and the rest of the volunteers here have taken this place from a storefront into a wonderful space, and they're bringing shows from all over the world here. So it's growing. There's how many kids you guys put through
Our after-school program?
After-school program?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we've had hundreds of kids come through to see our exhibit. Maybe it's in the thousands now. It's a lot of kids have come through.
And there's in the mentoring program
for the older?
Yeah.
Well, we've got about 20 photographers, and they're being mentored by different photo editors from around the city.
So these are brothers and sisters from the Bronx who are now working for the New York Times, the Daily News, going to college. I was talking to Ed today about not going into journalism school, pushing them into art school. So there's all this dialogue happening, but there's people from the New York Times coming down to teach workshops here, and you should bring your especially your boys. Cause we need boys in here too, in that line. So thank you all. Thank you. Appreciate it.